I have to keep my eye on this mic because I don't think it has enough battery. I've talked to people a lot over the last 20 years about critical thinking or things related to it. And one thing that I really often hear is the importance of education. So someone will agree with me that critical thinking is something missing, um, and something that we need, and then they will talk about how important education is. And yes, education, let's suppose that they're talking about the typical education that we receive, which is information about the exterior world. Yes, super important to knowing how to deal with the exterior world. Some people will go more fundamental. They'll say, but we mustn't teach people what to think. We have to teach them how to think. And they'll talk about, oh, college is so amazing because that's where you learn how to think, blah, blah, blah. Yes, great. And I love the direction that we're moving in because, of course, it's important to learn things about the exterior world, but it's also really important to learn how to learn. Um, but I want to go even more fundamental. I want to say that before we can do any real learning about the exterior world or even about how to learn about the exterior world, we have to first learn about the interior world, about the interior mechanics. Once we understand the system that's processing this exterior information, then we can more responsibly process the exterior information more reliably and maybe more faithfully to the exterior information. We have to know what's going on in here first. All right, so in support of that, we finished reading How Minds Changed, so we just started Steven Pinker's Rationality. My current critical thinking definition, or something like a definition, or something toward a definition, I break critical thinking. I define critical thinking as the sum of three things. And these three things, I guess, each have different contexts. So it's three different sort of capacities. Anyway, let's just say what they are: critical recognition, critical research, and critical reflection. Critical recognition is knowing about this, what the mind is, how the mind processes information already, what its inbuilt interpretive mechanisms are, the pre-installed mechanisms. Then two, okay, now once we know what about the receiver, okay, let's go out, let's try to receive, or let's try to get information from the exterior world through critical research. Scientific method is great. That's a way of having a reliable yield from your investigation. Um, by controlling for variables, by trying to isolate the variable that you want to test for, by having the control, blah blah blah. Okay, so that would be, instead of just research like maybe I'm looking at this and maybe blank is true, let's do critical research where we try to do proper tests. Okay, you know the variables and all that, and then we're building, of course, on, we already have our critical recognition, we already know that a little bit about the seeming process. So when I, a mind, perceive this object that I want to study, here are some things that are going to happen in me that may or may not match what is actually going on with this object. Right? So we have the observer bias, we have these other things in this, part of science is knowing about the, what is it, observer effect or observer bias, and it's having to do double blind trials, knowing that if you know what you're giving the patients when you're testing out a drug, that will affect the results. The selection bias, stuff like that. So that's all part of critical recognition. And then using data from the world and trying to be very diligent in how you get that data and how you evaluate that data. That's your critical research. And then critical reflection is, well, I guess, the last part of evaluating that data, interpreting that data. What does that data mean? Am I following principles of logic as I try to go from, and I'm not by default, as I try to go from the information to conclusions. Hola. Señor, atención, hay un perro, pero el perro es...
And otherwise, fix me.
No. Just if he comes to you, just go like this.
Oh.
Okay? Just ignore him, okay? Gracias. All right, so critical reflection. Trying to catch. Your mind is not going to automatically follow principles of logic, but you try to learn those principles and you try to catch when you're deviating too much from that. Mais du coup, il a pas sauté.
Non.
Moi, je l'avais prévenu, le mec.
Ah, c'est bien.
I don't love how I phrased the critical reflection thing about how, and maybe it's because I haven't really figured out what needs to happen for critical reflection. It's basically knowing how to check your processing of the information. So critical reflection would involve trying to write out sort of a justification for a truth, or trying to write out what you think the premises are, and then looking real closely. So I guess in my mind I went that if this, then this. Is that a fair move? Has that been indicated by the other premise? And then, you look at a bunch of different logical fallacies. Oh, am I committing this logical fallacy? We talked about in one video the undistributed middle. Oh, have I drawn this conclusion? But wait a minute. Look, the middle isn't distributed, and that's a fallacy. Okay. Or, oh, look, I'm referring to an authority in support of my argument. Wait a minute. Critical recognition, there's such a thing as the authority bias and appeal to a false authority. Okay, so in my processing of this information, in my talk about this person's testimony, is their authority here relevant? Oh, no, it isn't. Well, since I'm doing some critical reflection here, I'm going to need to cross that premise out. Okay, so I think I explained it better there. Okay. So those are the three things: critical recognition, critical research, and critical reflection. All right. Now, in support of those two things, actually, what I want to do before, or whatever. So I said that I am starting Steven Pinker's Rationality. We're on page 3. Chapter 1, How Rational an Animal? Question mark. I'm not going to read the chapter. I'm just going to read this one sentence, but I am now inspired to read this quote from Bertrand Russell. Man is a rational animal. So at least we have been told. Throughout a long life, I have searched diligently for evidence in favor of this statement. So far, I have not had the good fortune to come across it. And then Baruch Spinoza goes, he that can carp in the most eloquent or acute manner at the weakness of the human mind is held by his fellows as almost divine. I don't actually know what carp means, but if I understand correctly, it's a dig at, well, not a dig, but it's, well, anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't know right now. We can discuss that. You can just explain that in the comments. You can explain that to me in the comments. Oh shit, I have to charge my computer. Hold on. Before I do the Steven Pinker thing, hold on. Let's talk about from This Explains Everything, it's gonna be real quick. It's just a couple quotes. Robert Provine, his essay "Observers Observing." It's on page 85 in this edition, whatever. Of This Explains Everything, edited by John Brockman. Okay, so physics stresses the observed, psychology the observer. As horrifying as this may be to hyper-empiricists who neglect the observer, physics is necessarily the study of the behavior of physicists, biology the study of biologists, and so on. In many ways, when students in my course on sensation perception hear me say that we're engaging in the study of everything, I'm absolutely serious. In many ways, the study of sensation and perception is the most basic and universal of sciences. And when I read this in the playlist, This Explains Everything Mind, I said, and that's amazing. Sensation perception, in fact, is the study of perception is at the very bottom of the spectrum we've been talking about in this video, where at the other end is learning facts about the exterior world. Then there's learning how to learn about the exterior world. And then at the other end, there's sensation and perception. Right? That's the most fundamental thing. Before you can talk about anything about the exterior world, you have to have some sense of sensation and perception. What I said in my other video was yes, but then right after that, but before all the other stuff, is the interpretive mechanisms. It's not just sensation and perception, there's also interpretation. Okay, so we like to think of ourselves as these magical spirits, and sometimes we say, oh, none of that's important. We just need to get facts about the exterior world. And Robert Provine says something really, really important, which is, wait a minute, how that exterior information is coming in, this first layer here, that's really important. But they're still not magic. So not only are the eyes not magic, the eyes aren't sending it to anything magic. So the eyes are sending it to other mechanisms. So sensation perception, yes, the very most fundamental thing. And then the very next thing is interpretation. Is knowing about, so you have to know about your senses and perception, then know about your interpretation, so your deeper perception and your deeper sensations and stuff like that. Then, once you have that basis, okay, now let's talk about, now how do we learn, knowing how this works here and knowing what's already in here, how do we accommodate new information? How do we assimilate and accommodate new information? And then, once we've got that, now when you're 18 years old, you go to college, because that's what you've been learning all your life. Then you go to college, and then you start learning about the exterior world. Of course, throughout school, you should have been learning some things about the exterior world, but the main theme was what this is. So, of course, you're going to learn about evolution. You're going to learn about history and about how the things this has done, the ways this has succeeded and the ways this has failed. Okay. The math on it. Well, I guess the child brain does need to learn some basic math, but there's a lot of stuff. I think chemistry can wait. Chemistry, for instance, can wait until college. Okay, I mean some basic chemistry to know how this works. Anyway, but some biochem in third grade, and then other chemistry, photosynthesis you can learn about later in college. Okay, so Steven Pinker, he's talking about critical thinking. He says the San people of southern Africa, who are sort of the oldest people and have a recent history of hunter-gatherer society, He says the San also engage in critical thinking. So now let's see, which critical thinking is he talking about? Is he going to be talking about critical recognition, critical research, or critical reflection? Okay, let's see. They know not to trust their first impressions. That's going to be some damn good critical recognition. Okay. So sometimes this mind perceives and interprets something, creates an impression, and that first impression is not necessarily reliable. Okay. If you watch my interviews, and if I bet if I ask people this question, more than 50% of people would say, "Oh yeah, the first impression is the truest, the best thing." Um, so most humans lack critical recognition. Okay, so these sand people, they engage in. Pinker says critical thinking. I'm gonna say so they have some critical recognition. They know not to trust their first impressions. Okay, comma. What's next? They appreciate the dangers. Okay, so is this some knowledge they have of the external world? They appreciate the dangers of seeing what they want to see. So that's some more critical recognition for you. So they know that in the mind there is a tendency, a preference for confirming information. So if the mind already is imagining a certain thing, then the interpretive mechanisms of what is perceived may call out a false positive. Say, hey, yeah, this is what we were imagining, expecting. Yeah, this is yeah. Whoa. Okay, some nice critical recognition here. I'm curious about in Europe how the critical recognition compares. Let's see what else they got. Maybe Pinker's going to talk about some critical reflective or critical. By the way, you could say a fourth thing. Now that I think about it as I read this, you could say the fourth thing is critical communication, critical discussion. But then what's the what we need an R word. Critical exchange. Critical. All right, we'll figure that out. But you could say because the individual, the three pieces of critical, there are three individual pieces. There are three pieces of critical thinking that pertain to the individual. First, the individual should have critical recognition or needs to acquire critical recognition. Second, to learn the latest best principles of how to research. Third, oh, and then by the way, I've talked about in other videos. Here I just talk about critical research scientific method for interpreting the external world, but there's also how to read information, source evaluation, stuff like that, which is also part of research. So whether you're researching it firsthand, you're taking the measurements yourself, or whether you're looking at people's measurements and researching it that way. Anyway, so an individual, and I don't think I'll see this in my lifetime, but an individual that has critical recognition and is proficient in critical research and critical reflection. Actually, I guess I will, because there are people who are pretty damn good at critical research and critical reflection. They're just kind of missing the critical recognition. And so they're so close in the other domains, but you kind of need the critical recognition. I mean, good scientists, and scientists they almost do. They don't have sometimes they don't have critical recognition, but just the process. Even if the individual doesn't have critical recognition, the process doesn't care. The other scientists, so even if the individual doesn't catch their mistake, the other scientists are going to go boop. And so there are these corrective measures which allow for scientists to not, but a lot of scientists do, of course. Let me finish my sentence. There are corrective external measures from the community in the discussion process to correct for scientists not necessarily having critical recognition, knowing about all the internal fallacies. That said, most good scientists do. Um, and you have to learn in the process of doing science things like selection bias and so on. Okay, so the individual For an individual to be a critical thinker, they would need to have achieved critical recognition, and then they would need some good principles of critical research and critical reflection. Okay, you need to be proficient in those two things. Okay. Now there's a sort of add-on piece because it matters the community and how a critical thinker could share their thoughts. By the way, by the way, by the way, by the way, David McRaney was saying some really cool thing. I'm going to find this for us. All right, let's read 2 paragraphs from page 292 of How Minds Change. And so here's this is sort of, just to give you context, something that here I am talking about the importance of individual critical thinking. I'm not really talking about the importance of it, but it certainly feels like I am and sounds like I am, and I am talking about individual critical thinking. And so it might seem like I'm saying that's what we need. And typically that is what I'd say. But one thing that I think I'm learning and I'm trying to assimilate and accommodate is that that I'm learning from David McRaney, or that I learned from David McRaney, is that there is value in the individual not being a critical thinker. Coming up with their answer, saying their answer, giving their reasons for their answer, and then it's through the group, just like we talked about in the scientific community, that the best answer is discovered. We don't need every individual to be using all their mental resources to be trying to find the best answer. Just everybody say their answer. Now we got a whole bunch of brains saying their answer, then interacting about those answers, giving their reasons. And it's okay that some of the reasons are really shit, because other brains will go, those reasons are shit. The thing is, if you don't have critical recognition, or everybody in the group might be like, that reason sounds like shit, not knowing that, oh wait, of course a human brain would say that reason sounds like shit. That does shope a human brain. That doesn't sing for a human brain. But that's what we call a Porsche. A thing that shopes but shouldn't necessarily. A thing that sounds wrong but isn't. But yeah, but a community with critical recognition, at least, doesn't need the individuals to be doing critical reflection, critical research. We talked about in the scientific community, maybe the individual scientists don't need critical recognition. No, but the thing is, the scientific community is so invested in evidence and data and so on, that's how they almost don't need critical recognition, because it's corrected for. So even if anybody is overconfident in their interpretive mechanisms, the reliance in the scientific community isn't on what sounds right, what blah blah. It's more on the data and the evidence. So there's such powerful critical research and critical reflection that even if everybody in the system is like, oh yeah, my interpretive mechanisms are like good, I trust them, they're just not even thinking about that. They're looking at the numbers more, which is just automatically reduces the errors of assumption by looking deeper and deeper at the numbers. That makes sense, right? That's interesting. Now, in the public, where we don't have this same sort of obsession or dedication to numbers and p-values and stuff like that, well, now what sounds right can be taken as what is right, because it isn't necessarily checked. There aren't necessarily the critical reflection, the critical research protocol. So there's just the discussion part. So we do need the critical recognition. We need people to, in this discussion, know that sometimes things will sound right that aren't right, and sometimes things will sound wrong that aren't wrong. Okay, and here's what some examples are. Here's what some cases are based on knowledge about the human brain. Okay. Anyway, the point is, whether scientific community or the public, that not everyone needs to be checking all three of these boxes. Okay? All right, here we go. People who are vaccine hesitant, for example, feel all these feelings for different reasons, but the resulting behavior is the same. From the safety of their devices, they search the internet for confirmation that their attitudes and emotions are reasonable. Outside the internet, in the woods, the search for confirmation would result in because in the paragraph before he talked about you hear a noise and you shine a flashlight in the woods. Well, where did that noise come from? Outside the internet, in the woods, the search for confirmation would result in disconfirmation. I don't see anything. Or nothing. I didn't look over there, but I don't hear anything anymore. Or some innocuous false positives. Oh, there's a bird over there. That's what that noise was. Now I understand. Now I know. But it wasn't. It was something over there. But you're 100%. Oh, okay. And maybe that's an innocuous false positive, maybe. Unless it's a bear that you confuse that with a bird. Or it's not that you confuse it. You heard a noise. You had an explanation for the noise. End of story. Not because because you that's what you wanted, or you wanted to be some. No. Okay. There's a question, a mechanism going, hey, what's this noise? Okay. Motor, boop, boop, boop. Visual, oh, bird. Bird came in. There's a mechanism that went, hey, could be the bird. And then there's another mechanism who is waiting for an answer to the question from the question mechanism going, what was that noise? Here's, oh, it might be a bird. Boom. Let me put you two together. Send it out. The rest of the brain gets the judgment. It's the bird. That question's been answered. That's what happens. Okay? Don't add all the other stuff. Oh, we want to blah, blah, blah. Okay. Anyway. Like we want to, because we don't want to look any farther, because we don't want to think and blah, blah. No. It's just dominoes, bro. Okay. So, so outside the internet, in the woods, the search for confirmation would result in disconfirmation or nothing or some innocuous false positives. On the internet, however, confirmation is guaranteed. Even if 99% of the information available is disconfirmatory, if you are searching for that 1%, you will find it. Again, I don't like the phrasing if you are searching for that 1%. You may be looking everywhere, having the experience of looking everywhere. It's just that the mechanisms are like responding more, engaging more with confirmatory information. And then you end up exposing yourself more and more to that. Even if that's not your intention to look for it. That's just what you end up looking at. So if you're searching for that 1%, you will find it. I'd rephrase that as if you're a human brain, you will be mostly looking at that 1%. We do this because we are social primates who gather information in a biased manner for the purpose of arguing for our individual perspectives. Okay, let's not rephrase it. Let's use his phrasing because that works better with what he says next. Even if 99% of the information available is disconfirmatory, if you are searching for that 1%, you will find it. We do this because we are social primates who gather information in a biased manner for the purpose of arguing for our individual perspectives in a pooled information environment, within a group that deliberates on shared plans of action toward collective goals. We are lazy because we expect to offload the cognitive labor to a group deliberation process in which every flashlight looking at the forest adds something to the resulting argumentation before planning our shared decision on how to proceed based on shared motivations. So there you go. We don't need to be checking all the boxes, but I do think that unless we have the same empirical vehemence that scientists do, critical recognition is going to help us a lot. And even if we don't do good reflection, don't do good research, we have our biased manner, and we argue for our individual perspectives, blah blah. So even if we don't have critical discussion, let's say you argue to win. You argue to just prove that you are right. So you're not even doing critical discussion. But if the group as a whole has critical recognition, and that can be corrected for it. You say your piece, and it gets considered by all the minds in the group. Okay, that's cool. All right. So we know that the San engage in, as Pinker says, critical thinking, as Eros would say, critical recognition, because they know not to trust their first impressions. They appreciate the dangers of seeing what they want to see, which is what Robert Provine said about sensation perception, plus what Eros emphasizes about interpretation of what's sensed and perceived. Then, nor will they accept arguments from authority. Anyone, including a young upstart, may shoot down a conjecture or come up with his own until a consensus emerges from the disputation. So that's some critical discussion there. We don't know what the R word's going to be for critical discussion, but that's pretty cool. So they've got some critical recognition, and they've got some critical discussion. So even if they know nothing about logical fallacies and, like the concrete, the formal fallacies, even if they don't necessarily, they do kind of use the scientific method, though. He explains how, well, not really, but kind of. Well, they do some critical reflection. They have some good if-then processing of tracks and stuff. They use these categories to make syllogistic deductions. Steenbach and Duker, two animals, can be run down in the rainy season because the wet sand forces open their hooves and stiffens their joints. Kudu and eland can be run down in the dry season because they tire easily in loose sand. It's the dry season, and the animal that left these tracks is a kudu, therefore this animal can be run down. So that's some reflection that I think adds up, could be called the critical. So that's great. Anyway, so that's the point. The point is yes, learning facts about the exterior world is cool, but learning about sensation perception, yeah, okay, that's cool too. And then learning what is done with that automatically in here. And you experience just some of the automatic processing that happens. That's super important. Knowing what you are what's happening when you ask a question, what's happening when you see answers, what's happening when you see evidence that may be confirmatory or disconfirmatory. So yes, education is cool, but let's talk about education about the exterior world later. Now let's talk about education about what this is. Okay? And yeah, education about what the eyes are, that's cool too. And, oh yeah, my peripheral nervous system, my senses. Okay, cool. What about this? The central nervous system. Okay? So that's the sweet spot. Okay? So if you imagine a spectrum going from understanding the stars to the brain, and then, the most basic, how the brain gets information. That sweet spot, about 20% down the spectrum, that interpretive mechanisms. Okay, gosh, I'm just trying to say it's the most important thing. Okay, yeah, Robert Provine. Okay, yes, learn about the eyes, learn about touch, I guess, and so on. Yeah, sure. Learn that we can't see the whole visual spectrum. Eyes, we just don't have the receptors for it. Okay, yeah. That's important. Okay. But once those electrical signals or that, whatever image is sent in, then what happens? How does it go from that to words? Critical recognition, bro. So the takeaway is stop stressing. And if by the way, here's why I made this video. Just because I was talking to my buddy Fred, and Fred is frustrated with the world, the way people are, and he says that we need to educate. Here we go. See here, the ecological education of children. Okay, that's like a super important thing for a better future for man. Okay, sure. I mean for homos. Sure. But I was trying to tell him, but before you teach him about sort of the world and good values about all that, and he's like confused. Why? How come people are throwing plastic out in the world? We could probably articulate how that what that mechanism is and why there isn't interference from the conscientious of the environment mechanism. We could talk about how to strengthen that so that it's more the mechanism of what to do with my trash and the mechanism of respect for my home are interacting better. We can talk about that. We don't have to be so confused. We know that basically if there's plastic, we know that typically people wouldn't just throw garbage around on the ground at home. Okay. They're doing that here, and maybe they live on the island, but they're still doing it. Okay, so we know that since they're human, and unless they're like a sociopath or whatever, that they have a mechanism of not throwing plastic on the ground. We know that they are throwing plastic on the ground, so they have a mechanism that is going. That is doing that motor thing. So obviously, there's just a disconnect between those two mechanisms. Maybe reminding them that this is their home. I don't know how you would do that. Maybe you would make it look less industrial. I have no idea. But by then, when the mechanism of throwing garbage is executing, there's a mechanism who's been waiting there going, in case I'm in the context of home, I'm going to activate the home protocol. Oh, hey, we're at home. I'm activating the home protocol. Home protocol goes, okay, well, I'm if at home, then no garbage on the ground. So I'm just sitting here waiting. Okay, there was another mechanism that goes, if I have garbage, get rid of it. So that executes. You're about to throw it out. But since you've primed the if at home, then no garbage on ground, he's sitting there by the door. So when, if garbage, then get rid of it, starts activating and goes to do the output, he goes, woo! No. I'm if at home, then no garbage on ground. So, but then your pocket, bro, or I don't know, the government needs to put more trash cans or something, but this won't be acceptable. We'll feel so much shame if we do that. Well, that's another one. I don't know, you just put pictures of eyes everywhere. Because there's a mechanism in the brain called if being watched, then don't violate social norms.
Let me add that there's also a mechanism, if there are eyes, then I am being watched. That's a pretty reasonable mechanism. That's a good mechanism to have, to interpret having eyes on you as being watched. Great. And the great thing about the simplicity of the brain is that they don't actually have to be human eyes. They don't have to be real eyes. You can literally just put images of eyes, and that will trigger the mechanism, if there are eyes, then I'm being watched, who in turn will trigger the mechanism that I've been talking about, that I'm about to talk about, which is, if I'm being watched, then don't violate social norms. I kind of skipped over that, so some of you might have been going, why would pictures of eyes get anyone to be paying attention to, not want to avoid social norms? We're not stupid. Actually, we're brains. And yeah, and it so happens that evidence shows that human brains get triggered by the sight of eyes, in a lot of ways as though they were actual interpreting, judging eyes.
So you put those eyes, that ticks that one, that slaps that guy, so then he's just waiting by the door. if being watched, don't violate social norms waiting by the door. Okay, so then we've got guy who the mechanism who goes, if I have garbage, get rid of it. So he's about to grab the controls. They're sitting by the control, sitting by the door. I know I keep mixing the metaphors. Sitting by the mic in the courtroom, whatever. He's like, whoa, hold on, just 2 seconds. He calls up his buddy, which is like, I don't know, the list of social norms, or some evaluation of social norms. So he basically just I don't know, he calls up the social norms mechanism. I'm having trouble phrasing it as an if-then. Who comes over and goes, well, yeah, basically you've got, if being watched, don't violate social norms, right? No, here's what happens. The mechanism who goes, if I have trash, get rid of it. Your knowledge of social norms, he already had with him, so he went to the controls. So if I have trash, get rid of it. He was walking up to controls to get rid of this dang on trash. But by activating, he is connected to other social norm mechanisms. And there is a social norm in his mind. Like, because I don't think that most humans wouldn't just like throw it trash in the middle of the street or something, right? I mean, they might toss a little plastic from their cigarette or packaging or whatever, but they're not gonna just like throw a bunch of trash or a bunch of, I don't know, typically, some will, but in which case, then you know that, okay, the social norms in that area, those are the conditions that we would need to, so the eyes aren't gonna work. Okay, but assuming that the eyes are going to work, because in this person's brain there does exist the mechanism that littering is a violation of a social norm. Okay, so there does exist a mechanism. How do you phrase that as an if-then? If I'm going to throw trash outside, I am violating a social norm. Okay, so there's that mechanism. Okay, so here's what happens. So if I have trash, get rid of it. He's going to the controls. That get rid of it automatically slapped. If I want to get rid of trash in the street, I am violating a social norm. Okay. So violation comes up, but he doesn't say anything. His job isn't like, if I'm violating a social norm, then fucking stop it. He just comes along and we both walk up to the controls. Me, I'm if I have trash, then get rid of it. So I'm rid. He's violation. We come up. And then sitting there by the controls, the guy who's been primed, the guy who's been ticked by the eyes, is if being watched, don't violate social norms. So he's sitting there by the controls. So I go, hey, I'm just going to grab these hands. I'm just going to toss this on the ground. Violation's just standing there next to him. He's just been tagged to come along. But then the guy who's been sitting there, who's the if watch don't violate, he goes, wait a minute, I see who you're with here. I see this information here. This is a violation. Hold on. Nope, stop it. You showed up with him. Get out of here. I would have let you through, but you showed up. That's a violation. I recognize that immediately because you got your buddy violation here, saying it's a violation. Boop. So there you go. So without the eyes, you didn't have the guy who connects the fact that it's a violation to not doing it. You understand? Who can actually interfere. You understand? So input, output. Okay, great. Great. And so that's how with critical recognition, that's an example of how with critical recognition you could actually figure out how to, for instance, stop littering. What are the conditions to slap the thing? And it's not just, oh, hey, don't litter. You put that in the brain, don't litter. And then that guy's just sitting in the corner. If what, don't litter? I don't even know what I'm doing here. Don't litter. Okay, litter is bad, I guess. But then when the mechanism to get rid of something runs, there's no connection. And this guy doesn't do anything. There are plenty of people that litter, but then if you ask them, is littering bad? They go, yeah. And not just them because it, and they'd probably go, yeah, I know, and I, blah, blah, blah. I remember there was a guy, I hate when people stand on the left on an escalator, for instance. And I remember I was talking to a guy about this, and he goes, "Oh man, I'm one of those people, and I just keep forgetting." So he'll be standing there left. He knows he's not supposed to, and it just doesn't click. And then every time someone comes up behind him, he goes, "Oh fuck, shit." All right, there you go.